Hey folks, Fernando doing another video for the Modern Survivalist, and in this case I'd like to address something that was sent to me through email about a post over at ar15.com regarding the title says why the disagreement between Bosniak and Fairfeld on rural areas in SHTF, and the post says there it is. And the post says, I noticed that Bosniak in his excellent recent thread said you should avoid the cities and that rural mountain areas were safest in the Balkans. On the other hand, Fairfeld said when Argentina collapsed, cities were the safest and rural areas were too isolated and vulnerable. Why were these scenarios so different? So before I get into this, if you're interested in this sort of thing, of course I always have my books linked there below. If you're interested in my take as of survival preparedness, especially the stuff regarding Argentina crisis, that's stuff of my first book, the Modern Survival Manual, and more relevant maybe to some of the stuff you're seeing lately and some of those skills that you may want to have, street survival skills, right? So that would be my take on all of this. But the short answer is quite simple, really, is that these are complex scenarios with lots of differences, even within the same event that you're talking about. Let's suppose the Balkan Wars. It's not the same thing being in enemy territory or not being in it. If you are in an area controlled by enemies and you're living in a small rural town or maybe an isolated household, you may be absolutely slaughtered to pieces. There's been accounts of people that were entire villages, women were raped and killed, every single male was instantly murdered. So you've seen lots of these things. You had houses that became like houses of brothels for the soldiers, where the occupants were just tortured day after day non-stop until they got fed up with them and murdered. There's people that were sold into slavery, women especially. So you have lots of these horrible stories. And it's quite complex. Is it better to be in a small town, one of these small villages, or one of a small farm in a rural area and get slaughtered, or is it better to be in Sarajevo and just have to run for your life whenever you're going to pick up a bit of water in a bucket, or avoid getting shot in Sniper Alley? These things are so complex that maybe I'd like to survive and be in Sarajevo and not get killed in a small village. Or maybe you're in a small village that is not occupied by enemy forces and you're getting by just fine. Now, one thing I will say though, this fantasy, this idea of I'm gonna be hiding there in the outskirts all like Rambo and just avoiding this day after day, that is fantasy, that is pure fiction, and it's just not sustainable. Hiding constantly from your enemies, you may get away with it for a while, but man, this is something that lasted for like, 8-10 years, Sarajevo siege, about that time. You're not going to be avoiding your enemies for that long. You're not going to be surviving much for that long unless you have some way of resupplying something in place. So what is it better then? It really just depends on the case. If you look at something like the experience in South Africa with the white farmers in South Africa, that is a great example of very rugged, very resilient people dealing with basically like a force, a government, an institutional force. The same government suddenly switch sides and they're coming after you, and they're coming after you because of ethnic reasons mostly. They're coming you because you're a white farmer, and even though they're not sending their own goons themselves, it's kind of like wink wink, unofficially looking the other way as you're getting slaughtered by their own sympathizers, thugs, criminals, rapists, all of these scum of the earth that is just giving an unofficial green light to just murder, rape the people that are of the opposition, at least in their own eyes, right? How much can you survive in that scenario? Not very well. You've had thousands of white farmers slaughtered in South Africa. I think that's a very good example of people that are armed. Absolutely. Some of these guys had landmines in their farms. Do you have landmines in your own house right now? Do you have like a welded iron gate with spikes, and you have hired mercenaries, protecting your farm right now as we speak? No. Well, these guys did. And it wasn't enough. It just wasn't enough, because when you have the entire government against you, they always have the chance of winning. And even if you win this fight, you're eventually going to be losing one. And you just have to lose one. When someone has the ability of sending an endless stream of fanatic, of goons, truck after truck, eventually you're going to be running out of luck. Believe me, it's going to be sooner than you think. So this fantasy about you fighting off the UN troops, it's not the UN. It's not going to be. It's more likely to be a BLM, Antifa truckload of sympathizers that are coming after you, because you're not following the newly passed law about social distribution of whatever assets it is that you have, or some kind of bullshit like that. It may well be the actual local police that shows up and says, hey, come on, man, we know that this sucks, but you have to give it up. You know how this is. Yeah, so I think these bastards, how, but you're still getting the knock on your door. You're still being told to comply, and good luck with not doing that. It's not going to be nice. And this brings me to that other point where trying to answer the question regarding this, why the difference, because there are different situations. I bet that some people during the Bosnian War, some people that were in the city, in some cities, fared better than others, and some people in rural areas fared better than others as well. In the case of South Africa, it's very clear that when you have such overwhelming forces, and it may be your own government, it may be an invading force, like in the case of Eastern Ukraine. There's another example of Eastern Ukraine where there was this guy that he has a very nicely set up homestead, big chunk of land, nice house at the top of a hill, big antenna. The first things the Russians noticed when they rolled in was that house has a huge antenna. We can use that. He kindly knocked on the guy's door and told him that, we need this. At least you're not getting shot right there in the spot, and you're giving the chance to just walk away. I mean, you could make your last stand if you want, if you think that's going to be making you some kind of hero. I think that Hollywood did a lot of damage here in terms of the fantasy of the survival rate that you have when going against overwhelming numbers. Right? That makes sense? That is one of the greatest damages that Hollywood has done. And some of the fantasies that, even though using their common sense people understand that's not real, they still think that maybe it is. And a lot of this, of course, is bravado, is just tough guy talk on the internet. We all know that if it gets to that point, what would be the point of getting killed when the Russians invade your land you're in it, and you're being told just go. We need this. We're going to be taking it from you, and you can either die here right now, or just gather your stuff and leave. At least the stuff that we don't need, right? Can it get to that point? And can it get to the point in which you're kind of unofficially suggested to leave, and then you're told to leave, and then you're forced to leave? That may be the case as well. Of course, it's always better if you do things on your own terms. If you see this going this way, my advice is there's no point in going on with it. If you are in enemy territory, whatever that is, it's always better if you do things on your own, on your own account, your own way. That's usually better than when someone comes out of an official vehicle and tells you, you have a week now before we take this over, because you haven't been following with the law of whatever it is, right? That's just the way I see it. In the case of Argentina, was it safer to be in the city? Then depends on what you're looking at. I mean, when I wrote about this, and when I talk about this, one of the things I point out is that, yes, of course, crime happens across the entire country. It definitely happened. There's kind of crimes that happen way more often, like in urban areas and cities, like pickpocketing, even armed robbery. Of course, it happens more often in cities. The thing about being in the country in Argentina is that you're a lot more like in that South African situation, where you're exposed to whatever dark fantasy, the bunch of criminals of thugs that come after you have in mind. And that can be very, very ugly. Usually when it's a case of home invasions, they kind of have this doubt of maybe a neighbor saw us, maybe someone was alerted, so let's just try to keep things fast. I mean, horrible things can happen as well, but it's less likely that they have that peace of mind, unlike they do in an isolated house in the country where they can torture you as much as they want. No one's going to be hearing you scream, literally, and they feel that they can get away with a lot more than if they are in a bit more of a hurry. So basically that's, and I've heard conversations of, I remember one specifically, a couple women, younger women, I don't know what they were, but I was in the dentist, waiting in the dentist's office, and I overheard their conversations. Two young women saying that they were planning on moving to an apartment. Moving to an apartment from a house. They were living in one of these quintas. A quinta would be like a little homestead house with a bit of land. Some of these larger estates with a bit more land and a house and such. They were planning on leaving that behind. Probably a quinta would be like more of like a farmhouse, not exactly a farmhouse. In Argentina, a farm is just like several acres of land, but more of like a little homestead with just maybe a couple acres or maybe 1 acre or something very small, but house, a bit of land and such. They were planning on leaving it because of safety reasons. They were planning on moving to an apartment building where they had more safety. They had maybe a security from the building itself. The gate was more controlled, and they basically felt and probably were safer than a couple women alone in a house. And it doesn't apply only to women. The same thing happens. Depends on where you are, but there's no question that if you are in a place that doesn't have its own security, you're going to be more exposed to this kind of crime, especially in places where it gets more dangerous. Some of you guys just don't. I was just watching right now a video from Valentina Shevchenko, the MMA fighter. She used to live in Peru. She's a tough lady, and her coach was his brother-in-law marrying her sister, who's also an MMA fighter. The guy has a concealed carry license. They were living in Peru, Peru in South America. And the guy was ex-Soviet army. He had a concealed carry gun, and he was robbed. They robbed in a restaurant where Valentina Shevchenko and her brother-in-law were celebrating a new belt that they won or whatever. There's video of it. It's quite interesting. They get attacked. 3 guys in Peru in this restaurant, 3 armed guys, and the guy goes after them with what seems to be a Glock. So he has his concealed carry gun. He just starts firing. They fire back and such. And they shot him twice. He survived, but he could easily have died. He also managed to wound a bystander, which sucks. But my point is, some places, man, are rough. Some places are dangerous. And if you haven't been living in that sort of thing, you just don't know what life is like in these places. It's not the kind of thing that you can just adapt to or toughen it up and just, be strong and brave, like the kind of woke nonsense. No, these are places in which if you didn't grow up in that kind of environment, there's lots of things that you don't know the kind of risk you're taking. You don't know how bad it could get, and yeah, that's the kind of thing. If you've been enjoying a level of safety, civility, and not living with that kind of crime because that was not your reality, it's not because you did something special or you're particularly badass or you're particularly good at avoiding it, simply because it hasn't been happening where you are. When things change, and unfortunately it seems to be that way in the United States, the crime rates are spiking across the country. When the reality changes around you, that's going to be different. It's not going to be the same anymore, and a lot of this stuff that I'm mentioning is going to be making more sense. Okay, so basically that's the answer. It's just a complex situation, and it depends on each case. I'm pretty sure that there's people that are very happy with their decision, whatever it is, if they manage to get through the crap they were forced to deal with. If they did it in the country, it worked for them. If it did it in the city, sure. In the case of Balkans specifically, it's more about, are you in enemy territory or not? The thing about stuff like when it becomes political, like in the case of Argentina, political in the case like in Africa as well, is you are in the entire enemy territory. They just are either winking at people coming after you, or they just have no control over the situation, or unofficially they kind of want you to be targeted. So that's a different story as well. Guys, that's going to be all for now. See you in the next video. Have an awesome day. Take care.